All right, so good morning, and I'm so glad you're here to join me on this journey through grants. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So I was tasked with doing a presentation on the uses and limitations of grants, and as I was going through that, I realized there was a lot of information, and I was trying to find the best way to present it to you. And what I decided on was I was just going to take you on a journey with me through the process that I went through to find those uses and limitations. So that's what we're going to do. So it's not going to be necessarily your traditional kind of training. We do have objectives, we do have slides, but mostly I'm just going to try and walk you through that journey that I took on finding uses and limitations for our grants. So let's get started. I got to remember how to scroll through. Okay. So we do have some objectives. Like I said, first of all, what I would like you to gain at the end of this is you'll have an understanding of the federal and state regulations governing allowable uses of funds, and you're going to be able to locate the related resources. And then if we have some time for questions, we can do that. If we don't have time and you do have questions, you can go ahead and just put those into the chat and I'll get to them. And if I have to email that, we'll do that if we run out of time. So that's what we're working on today. All right. So first of all, we'll talk about the levels of regulation with regard to the grants. First of all, you have your award terms and conditions. There are federal laws, state statutes, and USBE administrative rules that we need to be concerned with when we're thinking about how to use our funds. And to effectively interpret and apply the various regulations related to your grants, there's an order of precedence, and that starts with the terms and conditions of your awards. So today we're basically going to be talking about awards that you're going to receive through the Utah grant system. So if you have any direct federal awards that you receive, while some of the principles will apply to them, that's not specifically what we're looking at today. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And I did put by the award terms and conditions, a link there. That's just a real simple training in Utah grants. It's a tutorial. It's about 4 pages, and it just kind of gives you the click here, and that'll show you how you can find your awards for any of your grants that you're looking for. And as that's where we need to start, it's important to know how to get to those. So there's that. Okay, now on to the federal regulations. What we're going to be looking through mostly with regard to the federal regulations is the Code of Federal Regulations. We're going to look in the ECFR, which is the electronic version of the Code of Federal Regulations. And while it's not legally binding, the electronic version, it is the most up-to-date version, and it is a good quick reference. So that's why we're going to use that one. In there, we're going to look through Title II, which is on grants and agreements. And within Title II, there's what's called the Uniform Guidance, which basically starts at Section 200 of the Title II grants and agreements. This is the Education Department's general administrative regulations that pertain to federal grants that are funded by the Department of Education, and it's otherwise known as EDGAR, and there's a lot of good information in there. Also within EDGAR, or the Uniform Compliance, is what is called the OMB Compliance Supplements and Addenda, excuse me. We're actually only going to look at the compliance supplement today. I looked at the addenda. There wasn't really anything in there that I found useful. It's a very short document. These documents, the compliance supplements and addenda, are updated, I believe, every 6 months. So they're constantly changing. That's just something to be aware of. And then we're also going to look into Title 34 on education. We'll just spend a little bit of time there. So first of all, let's talk about Edgar Part 200. So when I was going through this, this is where I started, was going through that Code of Federal Regulations, the Title II grants. And in Part 200, this was where I spent most of the time, and it has 6 subparts to it, A through F. And as I started going through, I did start with subpart A and I looked through there. It's basically acronyms and definitions, and there are definitely a lot of them. So I found that that was something that I really only wanted to look through on an as needed basis, because just too much to just go through and look at. And it really didn't apply unless it applied, right? So I didn't need to read through all of it. Next, I went through subpart B, which were the general provisions. Basically, what I found in here was a chart that I went through to help me determine the applicability of Edgar to the grants that I was looking at. So basically these subparts A through F. Once I went through that chart, I did discover that A through F were all applicable to grants. There were some exceptions in there. Those didn't really apply. So, and that's basically what the rest of subpart B was going through those exceptions. So I decided, okay, I can go on from this and we'll go into subpart C. Subpart C is on pre-federal award requirements and the contents of federal awards. The only thing I found in here that was really applicable to what we're looking at, which is basically uses and limitations, was section 200.216, which is on the prohibition of certain telecommunications and video surveillance services or equipment. So if that's something that you find that you're going to be looking into, I definitely recommend that you read through that. Otherwise, just keep it in mind in case that ever does happen. So from there, I went on to subpart D, which is post-federal award requirements. Basically, what I found in here were best practices kind of things, like financial information about how financial management of your grant should be handled, internal controls. And while those are all great things, and I highly recommend actually that you go through them at some point, they weren't applicable to what we were looking at. So I just went on to the next one. Now, subpart E, the cost principles, was where I found the bulk of what we're going to talk about with regard to federal grants today. That was where the meat of what I was looking at was found. And then there's also subpart E, which is basically audit requirements. So I didn't feel like I needed to go through that at all for the purposes of what we're looking at today. All righty. So we're going to actually look into Edgar itself in just a few minutes, but I wanted to start here. This is from section 200.403, and it's basically factors affecting the allowability of costs. And this was, when you're trying to determine if something is allowable, this definitely is your best place to start. So in order for a cost to be allowable under Edgar, it needs to be necessary, reasonable, and allocable. It needs to conform to the limitations and exclusions set forth in the principles of the awards itself. So back to that award letter, it needs to be consistent with your LEA's policies and procedures. It needs to have consistent treatment. And basically what that is you cannot assign a cost as a direct cost if any other cost incurred for the same purpose in like circumstances has been allocated to a federal award as an indirect cost. So let's say that you have a secretary that you decide you want that secretary is going to be working part of their time in special education, and otherwise we have in the past treated that secretary as someone who we put in our indirect costs. So basically for this requirement, if that secretary is used as for an indirect cost in the past, or still you want to use part of their salary for indirect costs and have the other half go directly to sped ed, you can't do that. If they're an indirect cost, then the full salary or full cost of that secretary would be considered an indirect cost. Okay, so your costs also need to follow GAAP. They need to not be included as a cost of any other federally financed program. There needs to be adequate documentation for the cost, and it needs to be incurred during the approved budget period. All right, so as I said, we're going to get into Edgar. So I'm going to get out of my presentation for a moment, and we are going to go look at Edgar. So let me just get it up here really fast. All righty. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to get my screen sharing going and I'm finding that challenging at the moment. It works in practice and then you do it in reality and all of a sudden, I hate that. I'm just going to ask for a reason. Well, thank you. Sorry about that, you guys. Okay, Edgar. Here we go. Okay.
I think we're screen sharing back on the PowerPoint.
Okay. I apologize. This worked so well when I practiced, I promise. Are you seeing it yet? Are you still seeing it? Okay.
You're getting some comments from the crowd. They know exactly what you mean. No worries. We've all been there.
Okay. It's still not there.
No, not yet.
Okay. I think I figured it out. No, it's not that one.
That's the
Okay.
PowerPoint.
That's why.
Which
You know
one
what? I
has
think we
your-
moved off of Edgar when we were looking at this. So we are gonna. I so apologize. My goodness. Okay.
But just there, yeah, just click on there for a minute. Or like scoot, I can grab that bar. Or I can share my internet.
Okay, how about you do that? Oh my, okay. Marie's gonna help me out. She's gonna share her screen for you.
What's the website you want me to go to?
It is EFCR.
EFCR.
.gov.
It says website can't be reached.
Okay. It's federal regulation, Code of Federal Regulations, CFR.
Okay, yep, there we go. Okay, we will share here for you.
Okay. So this is our Code of Federal Regulations. There's a lot in here. We're gonna go to. So we're gonna look at part 200. We're gonna scroll to so are you in
Just about. Sorry.
No, please, no worry. I'm sorry. I actually might be able to do it myself now.
And it's not giving me
Okay, let me.
that option.
I think I've got it.
Oh,
Okay,
you
there we
do,
go.
you got it.
Oh my goodness,
Lisa figured it out.
so apologize. Wow. Okay, here we go. So we're in Edgar now, and what I went through was this grants and agreements in Title II, yeah, okay. And as I went through here, I actually looked through all of it. And I looked through subtitle A and I went through it to see what I could find. And then I found, okay, really don't need to worry about the things that are in there. So we're going to go straight to Edgar. And we're going to kind of go through this fast, but there are those subparts that I told you about. What we're going to look at is the cost principles here. And we're going to start at 403. So I'm just going to scroll down to that. So we talked about that factors affecting allowability of costs. Then we go down further and we find section 404 has information regarding what makes it a reasonable cost. And basically, it's the cost is considered reasonable if in its nature and amount, it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time the decision was made to incur the cost. And there's more information there. You can read through it, but that's basically in a nutshell what we're thinking about when we consider reasonability. Lots of information on allocation of costs, allocability of costs. Basically, a cost must be charged in accordance with the relative benefit that you receive. So let's say that you want to buy a piece of equipment and you're going to use it in your CNP program, your child nutrition program, but you also, as part of your curriculum, you do teach the children about cooking. So you're going to want to use it there too. So you have to determine, okay, how much of this piece of equipment are we using for our CNP program and how much are we using in the instructional portion? And you can whatever the cost is that you're going to use for your CNP program or whatever proportion, you have to take that amount, multiply it by the total cost. And that's the only amount of the cost that you can charge to the CNP program itself. So that's what we mean by being allocable, or an example of it. Also, if you come down further, there's information on direct costs that starts in 413. So we're just going to kind of scroll. This is, like I said, I'm taking you on my journey. So this is what I did. So there's information on direct costs. You go down further to 414. There's information on indirect costs as well. But where I found the most information that was really applicable to what we're doing, and I'm going to do a quick jump there, is it starts at 400-221 and it goes through 476. And these are specific costs. They're in alphabetical order. So it started with advertising, and you can see come down. Yeah, they're in alphabetical order, and they are, in general, it will tell you whether it's allowable or not, but it's also going to say subject to your award. That's not always the case. If you look here on alcoholic beverages on 423, alcoholic beverages are not allowed. There's no circumstance under which we could find an award that would work. If we look at a different one, though, in section, let's say 469, that's on student activities. And if you look through it, it says, okay, these activities are unallowable. However, unless your federal award says that for some reason they're allowable. So just keep that in mind. There's some things that are going to be yes, some things are going to not be a no, and some are just going to be subject to your award itself, which is why it's so important to know what your provisions are for your award. And also you're going to find, we looked at alcohol and student activity costs. Those were just really simple, one paragraph, actually one sentence, one paragraph, and it says yes or no, we got it. If you're looking at other things, especially compensation, you're going to find it's much more complicated than a one sentence thing. So as you're going through this, just know that it could be simple, or you may have to work through it to see under what circumstances it will be allowable for you. All right, so that is Title 200 of our grants and awards. So now we're going to go up to the top and we're going to go look a little bit at Title 34, which is education. All right, so again, I went through all these parts, looked at them, and what I found in here that was really applicable was, let's start in subtitle A. if you look under there, scroll down, you'll get to part 75 and 76. 75 has to do with direct grant programs. Like I said, we're not really looking at those today, but that information is there if you have one and you want to go look through it yourself. Then we have part 76, which is the state administered programs. If we look in there, what I found in here, and we'll again just jump to it, that was applicable to what we're talking about today. Whoops. 76,530 was where it started. And as you can see, this little section here is on allowable costs. It goes from 76,530 to 76,534. And it's just very little information, but it's there. And then as you scroll down, there's more information on indirect costs. There's actually a lot of information under indirect costs that you may want to look through if it's applicable to what you're doing. Whoops, not sure what happened there. Okay. Let's get back to our CFR. There we go. I think I figured this out. I'm excited. All right, so this goes through to 580 if you just want to scroll through it and look and see what's in there. Also included in here, there are use of funds by states and sub-guarantees, and there is actually some information about how funds are allocated by state to charter schools. If that interests you, you can look there. It's not really applicable, but it might be interesting to you, so I thought I'd mention it. All right, if we go back to subtitle, we change our subtitle to B and we look through this a little, we're going to see where we find some information. It's in these two chapters here, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, and then chapter 3, the Office of Special Education. We're going to go back, hopefully, to the presentation for a moment, and we're just going to talk about a little bit about special education. And well, let's actually, before we do that, we'll talk about the elementary. We'll talk about this one, chapter 2. So chapter 2 is basically, it's about Title I programs. And with regard to its uses and limitations, I found that sections 200 through 225, which, where are those? Well, let's look. Let's start with part 200. Come on. So, okay, there we go. So section 200, we'll do that quick jump again.
Lisa, there was a quick question. In short, what is Title 34 for? And they said they weren't familiar with Title 34.
Okay, Title 34 is what I got is it's education, and it just takes you through different offices in the Department of Education. We can look at it for a second. Go back there. So you have the different offices, and it just gives you regulations, general regulations for the offices in the Department of Education. It's not necessarily applicable to grants itself, but in some cases it contained information regarding grants. So that's why I went there. It's a good question. Okay, again, we're going to look at part 200. What I found in here that was applicable. Oh, right, I was going to do a quick jump. Okay. There we go. If we went down to 200.2.25, it started talking about the school-wide programs that are applicable to the Title I funds. And so that's where I found that information on the school-wide programs and others. And that goes through basically 200.69. It does have some very useful information in that particular section through 25 through 69. However, if you go down deeper into it, there are other things that you might find applicable depending on the kind of funds that you receive. All right, let's go to chapter 3 and look at that a little bit. And that's the Office of Special Education. And in 300, and we're actually going to go, this is where I'm going to go back to the presentation for a minute. I'm sure you've all heard of this. before when it comes to your special education funds. Is it showing?
Mhm. Good job.
Yeah. Let's actually get the full screen one. I like that better. Okay. So like I said, I'm sure that you've all heard of this before, but there are two underlying factors when you're looking at your IDEA funds that you need to consider when you're deciding how you're going to spend them. And that's the concept of excess costs and supplement and not supplant. And you find that in section 300-202 of Title 34. And sorry, we'll just stay here for a second. Okay, so let's talk about what it means excess costs means. So basically your special education students are considered general education students first. So you are only paying using your IDEA funds to pay the excess costs of providing those students with the services related to their special, whatever is on their IEP. Is that it? IEP, okay. So keep that in mind. So you have to expend at least as much on your special education students as you would on your general education students before you start dipping into your IDEA funds. So that's what the idea of excess costs is. And then supplement, not supplant. That is if the cost would be paid out of other funds, if the student were not a special ed student, then the IDEA funds should not be used for that purpose. So let's say for some reason you have an interventionist in your school, or you decide to have an interventionist. And if you would have that interventionist to help out with any other students, if they weren't special ed students, if you would still have that position filled, then that's not something you want to use your IDEA funds for. But if you're getting the interventionist specifically to help with your special education students, so that would be something that would be considered a cost that you could use for your IDEA funds. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so let's go back and look at our code of federal regulation for a minute again. Okay, so other areas that I found in this chapter that were of particular help were sections 200, or I'm sorry, yeah, 202. We're going to do a jump again. 300 point, whoops, I keep doing that. 300.202. Yeah, a quick jump. There are 28 of them, of course. Okay, we're looking here. This is where I found information on use of amounts. And it was 202 through 210 that I found of particular help in what we're looking at here, and uses and limitations. So there it talks about maintenance of effort, exceptions to maintenance of effort. So just this is the information that as you're considering whether your costs are allowable or not, these are things that I would recommend that you go and look at. The last one we're going to look at here is 513 or 300.517, which is on attorney's fees. So basically there's a prohibition on the use of IDEA funds with respect to certain actions and proceedings. So if this is something, if you find yourself having to worry about this issue with attorney's fees because you have some kind of litigation or something going on, this is where you want to go, just to look at this and see how it applies to your situation so that you can make sure you're using your funds appropriately. All right, jumping back to our presentation. Hopefully. All right, there we go. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the compliance supplement. And the compliance supplement, what I like about it is part of EDGAR, and it's actually a quick way to research individual grant programs. The purpose of the document actually is to help the auditors audit, but in order for an auditor to audit, they need to know what is allowable, right? So that's why it's helpful to us, because it does have information on what is allowable. So we're going to jump into that real quick. Maybe real slow, just whatever, however it works out. Oh, there we go. Okay. So it seems like every time I share my screen, I lose my Zoom. But I'm gonna
Go
get
to
this.
that
I got
triangle
it.
box.
Yep,
So there should be, if you hover over that.
yep, I got
Okay,
it. Thank you, Marie.
Yep.
I'm so glad she's here. Okay. All right, hopefully
Perfect.
you're
You got
seeing
it.
it. Okay. Now, when you get to this document, you look up in this little box at the top, you're gonna see this is almost a 2,000-page document, which can be very intimidating to even look through. So what I did was what you do when you look through any document, you start with the table of contents. And actually, I should have stayed in my presentation for just a little longer, so we're gonna go back to that. I know I'm doing a lot of jumping around, but I'm just really trying to show you what I went through to find this information for you, so. Okay. There we go. Okay, so like I said, I went to the table of contents and I found that part 4 has to do with the agency programs and requirements. And then I'm calling them chapters for lack of a better name for them, but I went through and I found that in chapter 10, chapter 84 was where I found the information that had to do with federal grants that were applicable to us. So the first one is the child or the USDA, the Child and Nutrition Program in 10, and then Department of Education is 84, where you find your title, your SPED, your CTE, and COVID funds. And then within each chapter, there's something called the compliance requirements. And you have part A of that, which is activities allowed or unallowed, and part B, which is your costs and cost principles. So I'm gonna go back to that again really quickly, hopefully. Okay. All right, here we go. So I'm just gonna jump around here for you. And we're going to go look a little bit at this. I'm going to give you page numbers. We're not going to go through all of these just because of time, but I'll give you page numbers where you can find them within this document if you want to go look back at them later. But let's just give you an example of what it is. So here,
Zoom in just a little bit.
yes, I can do
I
that.
think there's a plus at the top.
Yeah, there it is. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. So as you can see, this is your different CMP programs, your breakfast, your lunch, your milk. They're all here. And if we scroll down, like I said, and we're going to look for that chapter or that part 3 on compliance, which I think I've already passed. Programs and procedures. Up there it is. Oh, no, that's not it. Did you find it?
Was it CU?
Oh, it's part 3.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're all good because I found this a lot faster before, but that's okay. We'll get there, I promise. I think it's because it's bigger. There we go. We got our compliance requirements. Okay. So as you can see under here, we have activities allowed or unallowed. On this one, it doesn't have that section B for the cost and cost principles. It's just got this. And basically this one's easy. For your CMP, you can use the entire reimbursement or any combination of allowable operating or administrative costs. There is on your fresh fruits and vegetables program a caveat where you can only use those funds on your fresh fruits and vegetables plan. It can be used to purchase them, prepare them, but those funds can only be used for the fresh fruits and vegetables. You can't use them in your lunch program, breakfast program. Those can't overlap. So that one was really easy there. Okay, then we're going to go look for your Department of Education starts on 1041 for those grants. And this is what's called a cross-cutting section. So basically, if you scroll here, you're going to see all these different programs parts. The cross-cutting section is basically if it applies to more than one program, it's in this section. So there may be more specific rules that apply to the program later on that we'll look at, or I'll just talk to you about. But if it applies to all of them, you're going to find it here. So again, we're just going to scroll down and find that section 3. And there's a lot of information in here. So here's our compliance requirements. So we go down here, activities allowed or unallowed. There are quite a few of them. And you're also going to know that some of these are going to talk about they're being applicable at the state level and then some at the LEA level. So that's something you want to look for as you go through these two to see if it applies to you as an LEA or if it applies to the state. And it also gives you the specific programs that the section applies to. Okay, lots of information in here that's helpful for you in looking at those. And then we're going to look at also one other section so I can just show you how it applies specifically to one of those grants that we're looking at. That cross-cutting section applies to a bunch, and we're going to look more specifically. So we'll look at your Title I grants. If we look at this section, we go down, scroll down to that section 3. You're going to find there's not a lot of extra information here, but it's going to refer you back to that part that we just looked at, the 8,400, if there's nothing specific to it in there. And then, so I'll just tell you for the other parts where you can find the information. We won't actually go there. So if you're looking for information on IDEA funds, that starts on page 1099. Your CTE funds will start on page 1193. And if you have COVID funds that you're still wanting to have information about, that starts on page 1257. And also it's CTE, we'll go there for a second on that one, because I just wanted to show you something else. It's 1193. If you look at CTE, you're going to see a reference within here to the United States Code itself. And I actually put on one of the slides, I'm hoping I can find it. There it is. So it says Perkins 520 of the USC. Yeah, USC code. I did put, it has a lot more information on uses for CTE. If you want to go look at that, there is a lot of information in there, but I actually did put a link to it on the slide. If you want to go look in there, we're not going to look any further in that, but I just wanted you to know it was there and be able to see how the things that you would look at. So we're going to jump back into our presentation again. And this is the bottom. This is where you see that reference to the USC code that I was talking about. Okay. All righty. Guidance that we can find on USBE sources. Sorry, I'm checking my time. I just want to make sure we're doing okay. We're almost there. Okay. So I'll probably click on it for a couple of these for you. But this first one, if you watch the fall training that USBE did, fall finance training, CMP did a presentation there regarding the uses and limitations on their funds. Basically, it was just about following federal law, and then it did have something about equipment. So if you're going to purchase equipment that you want to use in your CMP program, if it's going to be for an amount under $25,000, there is a list, and that's what that link there is for. It's to that list. So anything on that list that is under $25,000, you can go ahead and purchase equipment wise for your CMP program. If it's over $25,000 or it's not on that list, then you actually have to get state approval before you can before you can purchase that equipment. This one I am going to take you to these for the title programs. So we'll jump out of here again. Okay. All right. I remember all my little tricks. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right, our S&P, or sorry, this is our what are called SEA programs and related initiatives. So these are basically your title programs. Each of the title programs has we'll call it a title. So tile. So under this program menu, you're going to find a tile for each of the title programs. And when you go into them, you really have to look around, but each of them has something that will show you how funds can be used. And so mostly what I'm going to do is just kind of tell you where you can find it within there. And this is being recorded. So if you don't get it all jotted down, don't worry, you can go back and look at it again. But I wanted you to know how to get to it and how to look for it rather than just telling you what it was. So each of those title programs or those tiles, when you click on them, they're going to have these tabs. And they're all going to be different, but they're all going to have an overview tab. So for this particular Title I program, the information that I found on the applicability or the allowability of cost or uses and limitations was under the overview tab. It's called Title I Part A, Supportive Effective Education. So let's see. Nope, that's Title II, forgive me. Okay, Title I, it's this first one, Every Student Succeeds. So if we were to click on that, it'll take us to a fiscal handbook. And on there, on page 16 is where you're going to find the uses for these funds. So like in the interest of time, we're just gonna I'm gonna talk you through these. So if you go through in the tile for Title II, and we'll just go look at it. I just want to show you again where you find those. They're down here. So Title II has a tile. If we were to click on that and we were to look in what's called, it's a tab called Application Support. And if you look down under there, there's something called Documentation, and you'll find a couple of resources there. There was one document on Title II Part A, and you might, if you can go through these while we talk through them too. That would be a good idea. So there was Title II Part A. It was called Supporting Effective Instruction, State Grants, Fiscal Reimbursement Guidance Document. There was very little guidance in there, but it might be worth taking a look at. But under that, there was something that the name, it's basically a technical assistance document, and it did have a section in there under called allowable uses of local funds, and I found that on page 3 of that document. For the tile under Title III, I found a document under the overview tab. It was called Spending Title III Part A Funds to Support English Learners, and it was page 5 of that document that I found the information on. Title IV Part A, I found something under resources called non-regulatory guidance, student support and academic enrichment grants. That was on page 19. There was also a training. It was a training. There's a trainings tab under there. There was a training called Title IV Part A, student support and academic enrichment presentation. There were 26 slides on that. Now, all of them were applicable, but I just recommend you kind of just scroll through it and look at it and see what was applicable to you. Title IV Part B, under the monitoring tab, there was something called USBE 21st Century CCL Grant Allowable and Unallowable Costs. Page 2 of that was what I found helpful. And then the last one I have for the title programs was Title VII. It was under the overview tab, and it was called Introduction to McKinney-Vento. Page 2 of that was what I found to be helpful. Lots of information. I apologize for that. I know it's going quick. So let's jump back into our presentation. Okay. We will get there, I promise. Okay, there we go. All right, it's much easier I found when I have two screens. All right. So, yeah, so we were looking at the ESA. I do want to take you here specifically for the IDA funds to show you what I found here. Okay, and the reason I wanted to show you this, whoops, not sure what happened there. Let's go back to it. There we go. Okay, so what was here, and this is called special education fiscal. And under the use of funds, there was this little decision tree that I'm hoping we can just look at. Okay. There was this decision tree, and it basically just kind of gives you, it asks you questions. So if you're considering a cost for IDA, it tells you, if you go through these questions, and if you get to where you go through this tree and you find it's not allowable, then you stop there. You'll see those are showing red. But if you get it's allowable under the, when you ask this question, then you go on to the next question. If you get to the end of the decision tree and it's still allowable, then you're in a good place. But, and you'll also see there's this allowable cost for IDA entitlement. I don't recommend you use that one. If you go under training, there's actually a better document. Again, it's called allowable use of federal and state education funds. This one's really good. We'll actually look at this one. So if you look under here, it's long, it's about 48 pages, but it has lots of specific costs, and they are in alphabetical order again. And if you'll see, if you look up here at the symbol key, you have costs that are always allowed, costs that are never allowed. And then if you see an I as you're looking through these, if you get to one that has the I, is allowed under certain circumstances, and you can look through this. This I think is great in helping. It's because it's very specific and it's got that yes or no kind of answer to it. Also, if you look under that same tab, again, we go back to that fiscal tab under training. There is this training here on that took place on 2/22 of 21, allowable uses of funds. This actually has some decision trees in it. And as they go through it, they actually kind of give you some costs, and they help you work through the cost itself and see what would make it allowable and why, and what circumstances it would be allowable, what circumstances it wouldn't be allowable. So this was really helpful, I felt, when you were looking at IDA funds. Okay, we'll jump back into the presentation. Okay, so, and again, there's, if you want to look at COVID related resources, there's information on the USB website that you have a link to there too. So let's talk about state funds now. We're going to do this really quick. So basically, if you look in section of the Utah Code, section or 53F1-104 on education monitoring and funds management, you're going to find factors affecting allowability costs, and you're going to see they look very familiar. They need to be necessary, reasonable, and allocable. You need to follow policies and procedures. They need to have consistent treatments, and they need to follow GAAP. There needs to be documentation, and they need to be used within the budget period. Very similar. Now, if you go further into that section of the code, you're going to find that it's going to give you information on what the state considers reasonable. So for at the state level, it's considered reasonable if If it's ordinary for the operation of the LEA or for the proper and efficient performance of the award, you follow sound business practices, there's arm's length bargaining, you're following laws and regulations, and it's within the award restrictions and conditions. If you're making the purchase at market price for the area that you're in, if a prudent person would make the same purchase under the same circumstances, those are things that are going to help determine its allowability or that it's reasonable. Allocable, it needs to be, if it's incurred specifically for the award, it's allocable. If it benefits both the award and other work and can be distributed proportionally using reasonable methods, then it's considered allocable. If it's necessary to the overall operations, but assignable in part to the award, that's considered allocable. So if we talk about the minimum school program, if there's a specific office within USBE, you can actually go and look within that office itself, and it'll give you information. We're really running low on time, so I'm probably not going to go into these. But if you're looking at the state special education funds, so there are actually 7 buckets that those funds fall into, or 7 separate programs. So this document doesn't have a lot on allowability per se, but it does tell you what those funds are for. So it'll help you define, if you find that you do have a cost that's allowable, it helps you figure out which bucket you're going to drop those costs into for your state special education funds. This one for the land trust, this is it's called School Land Trust Program Appropriate Expenditures, which was a perfect document that you can go to look and see how you can use your land trust program funds. Minimum school program. So there is a document. Let's see. I don't really want to go to this one just because of time, but if you go, there is a document, if you go under the minimum school program on the USBE, if you go to that program itself, there is a tab that says minimum school program descriptions, which is where I found this document. I found it to be helpful until I realized that the last time it was updated was back in 2013. I am mentioning it though, because it is a good starting place for your continuous programs to just look at and see, okay, it's a quick reference, but you really need to understand if you do choose to use it. The last time it was updated, it's depending on the program, it was between 2011 and 2013. So it's old information, but it is there if you want to look at it and you can find it helpful. Another thing that I found helpful is when USBE does its spring finance training, and at least in this last one that it did back in May, they do go through the new programs that have been authorized by the state and funds that are coming through, and they give you not only what the amounts are, but they talk about what the uses of those funds are. So I recommend that you definitely watch those spring finance training programs to get that information. And then if you look under the Utah Code, Title 53 in Chapter 2, that's your minimum school program. And it gives you information on most of the minimum school programs. Some of it's more useful than others, but it's a good place again to start if you want to look at those specific programs. And then for programs that are outside the minimum school program, Chapter 53F or Title 53F of the Utah Code is a good place to find them. You could also you want to look in the administrative rules, just kind of do a Control F and see what you can find on your specific programs. That's basically what I did when I went through the Title 53 of the Utah Code and for the rules, the administrative rules, just to get information on them. So that's what I did. And that's how I found the information I did. I know it was a lot of information, it was a lot of stuff. Like I said, you may need to go back and just watch it really quickly, at least this end part again, to get some of those title programs and those other things that are on USBE. I hope it was helpful. Please let me know. If it wasn't, you never want me to do anything like that again, please let me know that as well. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them at this time. I know we're either really close or over. Yeah, we're really close to the end. And I thank you for putting up with all of that. And thanks for your time, guys.